Mandela died on December 5th at the age of 95. Presidents, prime ministers, kings, and other royalties, as well as celebrities around the world, have eulogized Madiba, as he is affectionately known. As a global iconic leader, his struggles, goals, and accomplishments have been reduced to a single phrase: forgiveness and reconciliation. Yet Madiba was so much more than that. As a disciplined and loyal member of the African National Congress, Mandela worked collectively over the years with South African nationalist and freedom fighters such as Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Albertina Sisulu, Lillian Ngoyi, Winnie Mandela, Ruth First, and Joe Slovo, towards their shared goal of the creation of a new anti-racist and democratic society. Today, Madiba is compared to Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and his tactical strategies are reduced to nonviolent resistance. But these accounts downplay the fact that Mandela formed the armed military wing of the ANC, known as Umkhonto we Sizwe, or Spear of the Nation, after the ANC leadership concluded that the racist apartheid regime would not negotiate. Nelson Mandela was committed to South Africa's liberation struggle, and like his ANC comrades, was willing to employ multiple tactics, violent and nonviolent, to overthrow apartheid and achieve freedom for all South Africans. Our speakers will share their views on this extraordinary yet complicated and sometimes contradictory South African leader. We are grateful to all our presenters, and I will introduce each one at the appropriate time. And now it is my pleasure to present to you Professor Adishida, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and the Provost of the University of Illinois, who will give the opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Maurel. Good afternoon. I can hear you. Good afternoon. That's great. That's great. Let me start first by welcoming all of you here today. It's a joyous occasion, actually. But let me start today by borrowing from Shakespeare. In particular, I'm thinking of Mark Antony's funeral oration for Caesar. He said, "I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones, so let it be with Caesar." His oration was a rhetorical irony, but we do not have time to discuss that today. So today, however, I would like to turn Mark Antony's words around and say, we come to praise Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, not to bury him. The good that men do lives after them, so let it be with Mandela. As Provost, it is my honor to be a part of this celebration of Mandela. For that is what it should be, not a mourning of his death, but an honoring of his long, long life, a productive life. And I think there's no place more appropriate for such an event than on a university campus. At the University of Illinois, we have staked out an ambitious agenda, and we have publicly stated that we as a university community will solve some of the grand challenges facing our global society in the next 20 to 50 years. Indeed, these are high ambitions and aspirations. Well, some people have questioned this ambition as being grandiose. How could a single university, surrounded by corn and bean fields, change the world? Yet, here we stand in a week when the entire planet seemed to have come to a stop in memory of just one man. More than 100 world leaders were among the thousands who stood in pouring rain, crowded into a soccer stadium to honor the impact that a single man had on our world. A man who spent 27 years of his life surrounded by, not by corns and fields and beans, but by hard prison walls. And what were his resources, his tools? Just words, words, ideas, and unwavering dedication to the belief that truth and justice are worth any personal sacrifice. Words and ideas, the very heart and soul of a university. They are the tools and machines of education. They are dangerous, wondrous, and in the right hands, they have the potential to move and shake the world. This is the lesson I hope we take from Nelson Mandela's life with us as individuals and as a university community. We have all the resources we need to change the world. It is up to us, however, to put them into action in the choices we make every day. I sincerely hope that none of you ever have to go to prison for 27 years because of what you say or because of what you believe. But on a regular basis in our daily lives, we are all faced with making a choice between doing what is clearly right or doing what is easily wrong. It is in these choices, in these moments, whether they are great or small, when we have the chance to move from mourning the passage of a man to honoring how he lived. Nelson Mandela showed all of the world, including all of us here today, that the power to effect profound and permanent change does not require the largest bank account. It does not require the strongest army. It requires only two things. It requires a personal conviction to do what is right, just, and fair. And it requires the courage to stand by that conviction when it truly matters. Conviction and courage. These qualities all of us do possess at birth. It is our choice and our responsibility to exercise them. So we stand here today in honor of Nelson Mandela, who showed everyone in the world what can be wrought when just one of us makes that choice. He was an African boy from a village who rose to towering heights as a beacon to the world. In African philosophy, dying is part and an extension of living. So Mandela has gone in peace to join his ancestors. In Africa, our ancestors are celebrated every day. So the question for all of us is, what could we do together if we all live as he did? That is the best celebration of Mandela's life that I can imagine for all of us. So thank you, and enjoy the celebration. It's a celebration. It's not a mourning. It's a celebration of life that he lived. Thank you very much.
During the liberation struggle of the South African people, they always sang the national anthem at the outset of their meetings, even though it was not the official anthem of the nation. In the spirit of democracy, during the singing, people showed their political allegiance by raising their hand. Those affiliated to the ANC raised a closed fist. Those from other Pan-Africanist groups raising an open hand. In 1994, after much struggle, and at the behest of Madiba, the African national anthem was combined with the anthem of the apartheid state into the current official national anthem, known as Nkosi Sikelel' Afrika. We are grateful that to honor this occasion, Ms. Susan Wood, the chime master for Altgeld Hall, a building on campus, played the South African national anthem from 3:50 to 4 p.m. today. We have provided you with a copy of the lyrics for the South African anthem. We invite you to stand and join us in the singing of the anthem. I need my helpers here. I need my helpers. I'm not going to be here. No, I'm not them?
Nkosi Sikelel' Afrika, maluphakamisu phondo lwayo, izwa imithandazo yethu, Nkosi Sikelela, thina lusapho lwayo, morena buluka setjhaba sa heso, o fedisa dintwa le matshwene, o se buluke setjhaba sa heso, setjhaba sa South Africa, South Africa. Die blauw van onze hemel, hoe die diepte aan ons zee, oor onze weggebergtes, waar die kransen antwoord geeft. Sounds the call to come together, and united we shall stand. Let us live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our land.
Amanda!
Thank you. Thank you very much. We will now begin by hearing from 3 South Africans who are part of our community. Our first speaker will be Becky Mandela, a PhD candidate in the College of Education and a former MA student in African Studies at the University of Illinois.
Power to the people. It says that. Power to the people. Amanda, it's power. Away too, we own it. That's when it happens like that whenever those who've been to the union probably will resonate more with this saying, because when you decide that with my might, with my power, I'm not doing that, and you can't take it. So that's where it comes from. Once the people have decided we're not doing this, it's not going to happen. You've got to persuade and talk, come down and talk. Because once somebody says, Amanda, away to, they belong to us. You are going to listen. This is not a story I'm sharing. It's a celebration, as our provost has correctly said, and granted that this man really has done a great deal, not only in South Africa, but also throughout the world. My name is Mbekiseni Mandela. If you want, you can call me Mbeki, Mandela. I'm leaving it up to you to finish. What does that mean? If you know South African presidents. Okay. Who came after Mandela? Then I'm leaving it up to you. Finish the line. But I'm sharing the story, which is my story. The disclaimer probably will be, I'm not talking on behalf of any South Africans, not on behalf of the ANC, the African National Congress. This is just the story of an ordinary South African who experienced the beauty, I want to start with that, and the bad, even though the bad came first. But I want to start because I want to appreciate to have lived through these two eras, which are very most important. To share what it meant to be in the era when Mandela was still in jail and when he came out. And I happened to live long enough even to see his death today. For an ordinary South African, born and bred there and lived in deep rural areas, like where I grew up, it was the struggle. And the way the South African politics had been crafted to a point where you might think it's a black and black violence, black on black, that's how we were labeled. It's a black on black violence. We're not there, let them fight. But it called for leaders like Baba Madiba to realize what or where the problem is. When you go back to the Freedom Charter, you will realize that this was a group of intelligent men and women who could realize that there is nothing wrong with a person. As he says, no one is born hating. You learn to hate. So you can also unlearn. That's the driving force behind that team led by Tata Madiba. And he practiced that. We saw it. So during his time when he was in jail, you are familiar with separate development, Bantustans, as they called it at the time, the Xhosas this side, Zulus that side, the strategy of divide and rule. And I wonder how much of that, even in the developed countries, still exists, but highly institutionalized in a manner that you might not recognize it if you don't know it. But if you know it, you smell it, you see it. It's right there. So that is the kind of intelligence that we were blessed with in the name of Tata Madiba, Oliver Tambo, Governor Mbeki, who was the father to our former president, Thabo Mbeki. It was the kind of leadership that believed in the collective. Even in our languages, no man is an island. I'm saying that in English so that you understand, but we have it also in our own saying. No man is an island, because we believe that there is no problem big enough when a group of people come together and talk about it, other than one person claiming the might and the power of dealing with country's problems. We are celebrating Mandela today because of that leadership collective. That's how they call it in the movement. Looking at all what South Africa has gone throughout the different political parties, we came to a point where we understood the third force. You might have heard also about that term, especially during the negotiations, and then even immediately after elections in '94, that every evil is man-made. There's nothing that comes like a disease. It couldn't. So it calls for somebody to sit down and think. That is why you've heard in his stories and his history that he had to study the language of the enemy. For me, Mandela was a Christian. God says, know your enemy. In his word, he says so. So you can't fight somebody you don't know. Maybe those who've been in the boxing ring or whichever kind of sport where there's one-on-one, if you don't study your enemy, knowing the weaknesses and the strengths, it's very difficult to conquer. So he had that strategy. My professor has said a mouthful about different strategies that people have went through. When this doesn't work, then you adopt this strategy. When that doesn't work, you adopt. So that is the kind of the leadership that we had under the leadership of Tata Madiba. So when he came out, the hope of separateness vanished. We began to see a new world in South Africa. We began to see black on black violence. Instead of going away, it came back strongly, especially during the early years of our elections. But we understood where it came from. You have a brother, and then all of a sudden you become enemies. And yet you have the common history. But we understood that it didn't emanate from within, it came from the outside. So we had a hope of schools that will have integrated. We grew up having these so-called Model C schools, where an ordinary person like me, especially of this color, would dare not go and attend in those schools. But the coming out of Mandela meant the end of that period. Shops. Talk of the state-of-the-art beaches along the coast, especially the East Coast. You wouldn't dream of going to the sea, hoping to cool yourself on a hot summer day, because it was reserved for a certain race. But it cost a lot of energy, a lot of sacrifice, and a lot of persuasion that they had to go through in order to get that to an end. So with coming back into the world stage, both in sports, in economy, we began to dream anew. Kids that were born during that era, it's history. They don't even know what's going on or what went on during that time. But now, the hope is back that we are going to reap the benefits of the freedom. I cannot school you enough because I've been in front of the TV days on end since his passing, so you seem to know so much. But I want to share that as a South African, we were blessed, and we are hoping that those that are still remaining in the reins and leading the country will pick up where Tata Madiba left off. And this is our fervent hope. And with the kind of support that you are showing as you were staging this memorial, that is the kind of hope that South Africa is hanging on to say the future remains bright. Democracy will thrive. I thank you. Amanda!
Thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to introduce Ken Salo, lecturer in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Illinois and an ongoing anti-apartheid activist.
Center for African Studies, Honorary Provost, thanks for organizing this and for making the opening remarks, which was my opening remarks as well. So I'll leave that aside, and we'll talk about it some other time. My wife, so first, let me express condolences with the Mandela family and also solidarity with fellow South Africans. I like to remind my class that I became South African when I left South Africa. All right, and so there's a difference. I want to share with you a glimpse of some of those experiences. But I talked and was reminded by my lovely wife this morning that this is a celebration. So my opening remarks was around the theme of Mandela, the enigma, the paradox, something along the lines of, well, their then freedom fighter, their then terrorist, and now, of course, hero, but our freedom fighter. And I think the story of how he went from being a terrorist to a hero, that's maybe for another day. All right, we will have our fights, our fights later. And I wanted to make my remarks around the question of what is the responsibilities for an audience like this in terms of what my fellow South African Mbeki has shared. So what is the tasks and responsibilities? I was reminded to speak to this question at the radio phone-in. So this is a difficult task for me because, well, we are to celebrate. On the other hand, I'm also reminded by our famous revolutionaries that we should tell no lies and claim no easy victories. And I think that's also the other part of our responsibility. So personally, I like to maybe start the idea that there's this uneasy paradox, this contradiction within the South African experience. It starts out with the national anthem. I can't sing the Afrikaans aspect of it. It's an uneasy amalgam. I just can't. And I know why people do it. I have a lovely daughter who has been the wonderful, deserving recipient of a Rhodes Mandela Scholarship. If you only got any sense of any of the history, those are two names that might not necessarily easily fit together. And I always insist that she celebrates the Mandela part, but totally and fundamentally rejects the Rhodes part. I'm not sure which is the bigger monetary contribution to it. I will still figure that out. But when I do study abroad to Cape Town, South Africa, there's this Baker statue on the foothills of Table Mountain, which I think I insist we should start the story always. It's a colonial story, the story of 48, which was a brutal and vicious aspect, but it starts with the period of colonization. And I was quite struck by those of you who, well, the other parties watched. I listened to the broadcast. There was really only two of the dignitaries who referred to what they call the apartheid colonial experience. There was the Namibian president and, of course, Raul Castro. They understood the colonial origins and roots, and I think that's something we should never forget. The other part of the uneasy contradiction and hyphen is somewhat personal, but it's pertinent, I think. That's the Madikizela Mandela part. Now, I was part of a movement where Winnie Mandela's siblings, they were not ANC. All right? They were involved in a group that was insistent on the unity of the non-Europeans. All right, the non-European unity movement. The ANC, they had a huge conference in the All-African Convention in 1943. There was a huge split on the question of tactics and strategies, particularly around the program, and more importantly, the question of non-racialism and what the four nations meant within the Freedom Charter and how we were to think about those things. So the ideal of non-racialism, which Mandela subscribed to as well, is a key part. Now, Winnie Madikizela Mandela has always been a controversial character, bless her soul. Even up till recently when she reconciled, can you believe it, with Paul Erasmus. All right, the assassin who made her life misery, and she gave as a gesture a wedding band to Paul Erasmus to give to his daughter. All right, as a symbol of reconciliation. So this is the strange contradiction. Even until recently, the fake sign interpreter who I just got in driving, his excuse was that he was subject to, can you believe it, a fit of schizophrenia. All right, so only in South Africa can we get these schizophrenic attacks, right? That is so South African. So if I say something you don't agree with, all right, it's just my schizophrenic self going at it. All right, so what do I want to share with you from the apartheid experience? I grew up in a household where my mother was a teacher, so we celebrated education. Education was a key weapon, all right, in the liberation struggle. And Mandela, in one of his infamous quotes, is about that. So as working class people, that was the main. So what was apartheid for us? Apartheid wasn't only about the material exploitation. It was about a struggle for the hearts and the minds of young people. It was a struggle against the concept which I want to re-invoke again. We called it then Herrenvolkism. Those of us who understand German will know it's the concept of the idea of a master race. Or I loosely translated into American terms, white settler colonial societies be referred to as white supremacy. It's a concept that still now we struggle with, and it wreaked havoc with the psychological and social dispositions of people. And we were required to police and enforce those aspects. But there was a cadre of teachers through the Unity Movement and a group called the Teachers League of South Africa that we refused to apply the apartheid laws. I myself had to go to a white university under the permit system. All right? And lots of my colleagues or the elders paid enormous prices. They lost not only their jobs, some of them lost their lives. All right? In refusing to admit people. And our struggle was our slogan, there was only one race, that's the human race. These were boys, young boys and girls, and that we should teach. All right? We rejected the idea that people would only be educated to a particular level, so as within the economy of the society, they would fit in only as the sort of users of I always get this wrong, users of wood and drawers of water. So we were forced back then, as I think we are now again at this point in time, what is the purpose of education? Why do we have these educations? These institutions such as the universities. What is the public purpose of education? Now we are faced with a different set of dynamics. This is more market-driven. Right? Are we here to make money? All right? Or what is the social responsibility? And this is an ongoing question, I think, that institutions such as ours here today face. Why? And again, we're facing these contradictions with the public and private universities going. So that's another phase of the apartheid, the post-apartheid struggle that's currently being written. But let me just again say, I think, so these uneasy fusions and tensions are a key aspect of the apartheid political and economic dispensation. All right? But, sorry, I just have to catch my breath a bit. Some of this is a bit difficult to think through. It brings back images. So, yeah, we soldiered on, we fought through. All right, but there were uneasy compromises that we have to think through, and even still today. So in the organization that I was a part of, there was 3 conditions which we felt was fatal to the Mandela and the ANC compromise. But I thought it important just to mention that. One was that the whole settlement agreement had refused to revisit the 1913 land question. All right, by which time the division of land, and the entrenchment and ensconcement in private property had largely been left untouched. And there's no way you can redress poverty in South Africa right now without dealing with what we then call the land question. It's an African situation. It's a fundamental question of colonial dispossession, right, throughout Africa. All right? And revolutionary thinkers such as Cabral and so forth will always remind us about the importance of this land question. And in the department I teach now, the issue of land use planning is not simply only about zoning, it's about how that shapes people's relationships in the alleviation of poverty. We continue to see this in a world of gated complexes and ghettos. The second and important contradiction or limitation of it, in my view, was who was going to pay the apartheid debt? So South Africans paid twice with their lives socially, but they also had to pay the apartheid debt, which by the time de Klerk left office had, I don't know, quadrupled to $113 billion. And still today, the social reform programs of the ANC is being hampered severely, all right, by debt servicing obligations. So this echoes through the slavery, condition. So these are, I think, some of the uncomfortable but necessary deals. And again, this is not Mandela himself. This is the question of the organizations and so forth. And again, as I said, that might be part of another conversation. But let me circle back again to the question I hope to leave with an audience like this. So what's to be done? What are the prospects and the trajectory for a non-racial future, non-racial democratic future? All right, and I want to suggest, Obama gave a brilliant speech to his credit, but there's a couple of things I want to disagree with him in that so far as the way to protect minority rights is not through, majority rights as well, it's by conceding to the aspirations of the majority. There's no way that we're going to alleviate poverty or secure minority rights unless we concede to the aspirations of the majority. And I think that is the key trajectory that we have to help to refocus on. So in conclusion, if I still have time, all right, some of you know what that actually may mean. I have African time, right? All right. So as my mentors, Neville Alexander and Co. would quote, it's time for us to go back, not to the beginning, but to go back to the source. All right, that doesn't mean forgetting the past. And to go back to the source, let me read to you one or two verses from a poem that inspired us when we were coming up. It's called Africa, My Beginning by South African poet Ngwapele Mnangwane. Africa, my beginning. They came from the west, sailing to the east, with hatred and disease flowing from their flesh, and a burden to harden their lives. They claimed to be friendly. They came to be friends when they found us friendly. And when foreigner met foreigner, they fought for the reign, exploiters of Africa, Africa my beginning and Africa my ending. In Africa my beginning and Africa my ending, suckers of my country, they laid their sponges flat on its soil and absorbed its resources to fill their coffers. Agostino had spoken in the language of poets that went away in multitudes and forgot their hearts behind. But late is never a bad start in Africa my beginning and Africa my beginning. No easy way to freedom. 10 lonely years, black hopeful men, food being their wish, courage their pay. Until Africa was respected, for a leader had emerged from the bush to Maputo. Viva Frelimo, viva! Africa my beginning and Africa my ending. I remember Jatoivo. Namibia is not lost. Jojoma is not idle. He'd be a coward if he was. You might as well know Germany is no more. In Africa my beginning and Africa my ending. Azania, here I come, from apartheid in tatters, in the land of sorrow from the marathon bondage. That Sharpeville massacre, the flames of Soweto. I was there. I will die there. In Africa my beginning and Africa my ending. Let's do something, Bopa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. And now I am pleased to present to you William Monroe, a South African political scientist from the Illinois Wesleyan University and an off-campus faculty affiliate of the Center for African Studies. Thank you.
Thanks very much for inviting me. Thanks for organizing this. It's been it's been quite a week for those of us who come from South Africa. I was initially quite sympathetic to Ken because the provost stole his opening remarks, and then he stole my remarks. So all bets are off. There's so much has been said this past week about Nelson Mandela that it's all a bit sort of overwhelming, and one's not quite sure what one can say in addition. I was very pleased that Ken brought up the issue of the contradictions that are sort of lie at the heart of South African identity, and the sort of slightly sort of surreal experiences that always seem to pop up. If you followed the memorial service for Nelson Mandela on Tuesday, one struck me, which was the bishop invoking Rudyard Kipling as part of the sermon, which just seemed to go back to that colonial history in an interesting way. And the other one was not associated with the event, but I was watching it on BBC America. I don't know if anybody else did this. Got up early, and they were just doing this. The whole thing was all the South Africa memorial, and then they got halfway through President Zuma's speech, and they cut to commercial, and then they came back from the commercial and they went to Doctor Who. So one can make of that what you will. In some ways, sort of given all the talk that's gone on, it seems sufficient simply to reflect on an extraordinary life lived in an extraordinary time. Certainly if one looks back on the lifespan of Nelson Mandela, born just 4 years after Sol Plaatje published his harrowing account of the removal of Africans from the land, his account, Native Life in South Africa, and dying just 6 months before the fifth, and perhaps in some ways a definitive electoral cycle of a democratic South Africa. His was certainly an epochal life. And I think perhaps one of the effects of his passing has been to inspire us all to reflect on the recent history of South Africa and our own intersections with that history as well as Mandela's. And my compatriots have done that here, and it's been interesting sort of listening to them and thinking about what I'm going to say, that we're all deeply committed to South Africa, and our visions are all in some ways are so shaped by that history and so sort of in some ways racialized. It's very hard to break the contradictions of a South African identity, and in some ways it makes us unique, and Bishop Tutu would no doubt celebrate that. And in other ways, it makes it very difficult, makes our challenges quite difficult. So we've been sort of pondering, I think, our intersections with South Africa's recent history. And of course, key points stand out, as they have for my compatriots here. For me, there are the first really direct encounters with the incipient violence of the South African government on a white university campus, first in the wake of Steve Biko's murder in 1997, and then in the context of the Free Mandela campaign in 1980, when we had a very nasty standoff with the police. This was sort of really the violence of the system coming home to South Africans and the difficulty of the struggle. And then personally, working at Rhodes University in 1983, working on the Million Signature campaign. I mention that because nobody remembers it. We didn't get 1 million signatures, but it was a 1 million signature campaign against apartheid. And then, of course, the 1994 election, which was an extraordinary experience, sort of a wondrous experience. You know, for a white South African, voting was not an unusual experience. Voting for democracy actually was. And of course, being able to vote for somebody black was absolutely astounding. But in between these sort of, the first experience I mentioned, the second experience, set of experiences, there was a sort of a deepening a spiral of violence. And this was the sort of the last phase of the liberation struggle. Mandela, of course, did not fight physically in that struggle. It was fought by thousands of youngsters in the streets of the townships and the rural areas. At extremely high cost, but clearly Mandela and his sort of imposed his absent presence on it, as he did indeed in the Free Mandela campaign, sort of a process of mobilizing opposition to the apartheid system. To me, the powerful presence of Mandela in that transition was his ability to mine, in a sense, that sort of Stygian landscape of violence, if you'll allow me a metaphor that seems appropriate to South Africa, for the nuggets of hope and a sense of possibility that made that election possible. Anybody who was there at the time, I was working in the United States at the time, I went back to vote. I went to my department chair, and I said to him, would it be okay if I disappeared for a week? And recognizing, as the provost pointed out, sometimes it's important for academic leaders to appreciate the absence of their faculty members. He said, you should just go. And I went back to vote. But that election was uncertain right up until 3 days before the election occurred. I was talking to a Bloomington Pantograph reporter a couple of days ago, and he said, I've got a ballot from that election, and the Inkatha Freedom Party's label is kind of stuck on the bottom. So it was an enormously uncertain moment. It was not clear at all. People sort of look at this as a transition that created something new, and of course it did. But the uncertainty of that election is, I think, important. It's being characterized as full of hope. It's being characterized as full of euphoria, but it was also accompanied by a sense of relief and of uncertainty. And this is important because the sense of relief, a lot of whites, I think, felt a sense of relief. Euphoria gives you a set of expectations. Relief undermines motivation because it says, okay, we've got through that hurdle, and it takes the focus off where you go next. And for a lot of whites, certainly white businessmen, the idea was, well, apartheid is over, we can basically continue doing things the way we've been doing them. And that has been a very hard pattern to break in post-apartheid South Africa. It remains one of the powerful challenges. And of course, uncertainty undermines trust, and it makes for a very kind of volatile political situation. And so this is a complicated and potentially unstable mix of sensibilities: hope, euphoria, uncertainty, relief. Mandela made it possible, I think, in many ways for us to move through that moment. And he did it, as others have pointed out, because everything he did rested on, or at least invoked, two key principles. On the one hand, his profound capacity for empathy, and for not only recognizing, but acknowledging and even embracing the humanity of his political enemies, even some of them even quite implacable. On the other hand, his steadfast and principled adherence to the pursuit of social justice, the fight, initially at least, for political freedom. And it's because Mandela held both these principles, I think, that so many people of so many different political stripes, certainly in South Africans, we all claim him. We all claim some connection to Mandela. He is ANC. He is South African. He is African. He is the term of the memorial on Tuesday. He is a global icon. But it's important, I think, to realize that that legacy means different things to different people. Some will stress the first, that is his ability to effect reconciliation. Others will stress the second, his quest for social justice. The key thing about Mandela is that in the heat of the political moment, he could hold both and project both principles with charm, with grace, with great political savvy. And if this is his historical legacy, I think, it should also be his future legacy. For Mandela, one could remain true to the pursuit of justice without demonizing political enemies, and one could engage political enemies without conceding ground in the pursuit of justice. If we are to embrace the legacy of Mandela, it seems to me that's our challenge. Anyone, and I don't need to add the details here because Ken and Becky have both spoken quite eloquently already of the post-apartheid political landscape, but anyone who's been following South Africa's recent trajectory knows that the long walk to freedom is not over, even though in the sort of relief phase of the election, many whites were thinking, well, the long walk to freedom is over, just as Mandela was finishing the book. But the political trajectory is very, very contradictory. It's very difficult. Certainly, South Africa today is a very different place. As many of those of you who visited Durban, Becky spoke about being able to go to the beach today as a black person. The beachfront in Durban is a terrific place. It's a wonderful place. It's a place of integration. It's an open and engaged space. But just up the hill, 3 miles away up in Cato Crest, people in informal settlements are being evicted from their houses, and their political leaders are being jailed or killed. So the contradictions today remain immense. And so certainly many of the political tasks that Mandela set himself and that were set for the ANC in the post-apartheid period have not been achieved. Holding the principles of reconciliation and social justice in conjunction requires a courageous political imagination. Mandela's was a very courageous political imagination, but it was not an unbounded political imagination. It was bounded by history, his history, and the history of society, and also by his affiliates and his affiliations. As Professor Bowen pointed out, his loyal and disciplined membership of the ANC. That boundedness was perhaps appropriate to the challenges, the particular milestones in the walk to political freedom, or the long walk to freedom, that the transition to democracy mapped. Perhaps his passing maps another. We do not know. Nobody in South Africa really knows what milestone we're at today. But these are new challenges. There are challenges, I think, that we go into, and as we do that, we need to, I think if we're going to take Mandela's legacy to heart, we have to recognize and maintain, expand, in a sense, the courage of our own political imaginations. Thank you.
I'd like you all to give a really big round of applause for all of these three speakers who have really shared with us what it was like. Okay. And now we will now present a cultural performance. We're so pleased that Dr. Mira Davis, artist, educational consultant, and educator, will perform with her daughters. Thank you very much. Let's begin with the cultural. Okay, we will now resume with our speakers. Let me introduce Professor Teresa Barnes from the History Department, and she has a joint appointment with the Gender and Women's Studies. As many of you know, Terry has lived and taught in both Zimbabwe and South Africa for a couple of decades, so please join me in welcoming her.
Is it this one or this one? This one. There's an Angelique Kidjo song that goes, the sound of the drum still has its power. The sound of the drum still has its power. Thank you very much, Amina, and your daughters, very much. In his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, Nelson Mandela describes how he grew from an understanding of himself as a Tembu boy to a Xhosa man, and to an African man, and finally to a proudly South African man. So I'm wearing parts of Xhosa traditional dress this afternoon to honor that legacy. Mandela was a man of principle who fought unflinchingly for justice. He was not always a man of peace. He took up arms when he believed that he had no alternative. I don't glorify violence, but I do believe that there is a difference between state violence that tries to build up walls between people and violence that is used to break down the walls between people. Common humanity means that we must always honestly acknowledge the cost and repair the pain of that violence. Common humanity, which is what the human race began with in Africa, is the final goal. A wise man once said, academic freedom is not something to be claimed, it is something to be exercised. So in that spirit, I would say to Barack Obama, if Nelson Mandela makes you want to be a better man, then go ahead. Be a better man. Stop the deportations, stop the drones, restore food stamps to hungry children, free Lynn Stewart, and free Leonard Pelletier, who has been in prison for 42 years for what he believes in. And I think this is the challenge of Mandela's legacy to each one of us. Finally, I want to follow in Becky's footsteps and lead you in a South African tradition. It may take a minute to get the hang of it, but I think you've already started. So, when I say, long live the spirit of Mandela, long live, you say, long live. Okay? You have to say it really loudly and with enthusiasm, otherwise it doesn't work. And I once heard someone say on a record, don't worry about what the person on this right side of you is going to think, or what the person on the left side of you is going to think, or what the people in front of you or behind you are going to think. It doesn't matter. Just say it loudly with enthusiasm. And then I'm going to say Maibuye, and you're going to say I Africa. And what that means is come back Africa. And it's a way of saying that we are all, despite the varied colors of our skins, we are all sons and daughters of Africa. So, you ready? Okay, so I'm going to say, long live the spirit of Nelson Mandela, long live. Long live. Long live the spirit of Nelson Mandela, long live. Long live. Oh, that was really good. Maibuye. Maibuye. Long live the spirit of Nelson Mandela, long live. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Our next speaker is Eric McDuffie, a scholar activist of the African diaspora and a member of the departments of African American Studies and History at the University of Illinois. Please welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It really is my pleasure to be here, indeed an honor to be here. Merle, thank you so much for the invitation to the Provost. And I must say, just after the comments that we've heard, I have completely decided to change my remarks. And I think in some ways I'm going to speak just from the top of my head here. But I've been thinking about what I'm going to say here for the last few minutes. I'd like everyone in this room who is old enough to think back to where you were on February 11th, 1990, the day that we received the news that Nelson Mandela was going to leave prison. Think back just for a moment about where you were and what was going through your mind at the time. I know I was a 19-year-old sophomore at Hamilton College, about to attend. Actually, I was at a concert for Boogie Down Productions. KRS-One, the hip-hop, the revolutionary hip-hop group. And before the concert started, they announced that Mandela was going to be released. And it was a complete shock. We were completely unaware that this event was going to happen. And needless to say, the night, not only was it filled with dance and excitement, but it was filled with excitement that this man that we had heard so much about, had seen pictures of, faded posters or posters saying free Nelson Mandela and apartheid, that this moment was about to be realized. This was not the first time in my life that I had encountered South Africa. Of course, in fact, I was thinking about this. When I was 6 years old, my parents told me that a white South African boy was going to start school where I went to school. And they said, if he calls you a kefir, you throw punches, you beat him up, and you tell us, and we will come to that school, and we will make sure that you're okay. I believe that was my first encounter with South Africa, and I'm glad to say that this kid never called me a kefir. But again, thinking about my own life and how it intersects with South Africa and being aware of racism, certainly that was a very important event. Also as well, in the early 80s, I recall my father sharing the news about a double flash off the coast of South Africa when the South African apartheid government exploded, right, a nuclear weapon. And the fact that this racist regime had the power to annihilate the frontline states, and indeed that this country, right, helped and supported South Africa. In fact, yes, I got to say it, and yes, President Obama did give a very good speech, but one of the things that he should have said, he should have acknowledged that it was the United States, right, that enabled South Africa, the apartheid regime, to last as long as it did, and the millions of Southern Africans who died and suffered because of that. Right? Lastly, as the provost said, we need to appreciate, to always keep in mind, always honor our ancestors, that they are always here, that they will always be here. And something that I was thinking about, that I always think about, is that all of us are here because we are standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, right? The Department of African American Studies, for which I'm a part, would not have been here had students, community members, and faculty who are here demanded, right? Demanded that we have a program, a department in African American Studies, right? That we would not have a Latino and Latina Studies department on campus, had students not taken over a building and demanded that we have a Latina Studies department. The point, folks, I'm trying to make is that, yes, that I believe that the legacy of Mandela, it's about the struggle for freedom, liberation, that the struggle continues for fair wages for faculty and graduate students on campus, for supporting the Center for African Studies, for supporting the Ethnic Studies Department, such as African American Studies, for indeed ensuring all of us faculty whose pensions were just cut, that we need to go out there and fight and get what belongs to us. So indeed, the struggle continues. Viva Mandela! Viva Mandela! The struggle continues. Peace.
Aaron, are you ready for this? You're next. It is my pleasure now to present Aaron Ammons, a community and trade union activist and poet.
All right. Hujambo. Habaragani. Nangadef. You thought I forgot, didn't you? Right. I was learning a lot over at Foreign Language Building from all of the folks over there. They were teaching me lots of things. So I was asked tonight to recite some poetry, and I'm going to confess that I really feel completely out of my element trying to rap and to say some words about Nelson Mandela. One, because my confession is that when Brother Eric said, "Where were you on February 11th, 1990?" I was probably in the Manors somewhere. I mean, y'all might not even know what that is, right? You know, but I was not, I see you, Mother Underwood. Thank you for waving your hand back there. But I was not politically, socially conscious at all. I think I was still a student at Parkland College, but my mind was in a lot of other places. I did have a pair of blue jeans back in the day when we colored the blue jeans, had a big, huge M on it, and it said Mandela, Malcolm, Medgar. You know, I had some social consciousness, right, you know, definitely. And so there was a time in my life when I was really, really in a bad space, and I was out in what used to be Bradley and McKinley one night, and I was approached by another young man who actually threatened to harm me, maybe even to kill me. And there was a separation of us, and I went away. Madiba, I was first introduced to you when my thirst led me to the threshold of a hearse. Instead, I went home to my humble abode to unwind, and what did I find? The water hole of the ages. My negative energy was transformed into clear direction as I lapped up all 625 pages of your memoir. True to the spirit of a gardener and a revolutionary, you were planting seeds from afar. When I finished, I felt the spirit of liberation and immediately thought that this book was a blueprint to take over a nation. A piece of the puzzle is now my life, partly because of you, Madiba. Now I live. You live, Tata. My father, before I knew how to respect mine, you made yourself available and easy to find. For 2 days, I didn't sleep as you poured wisdom and history into my gourd. So today, I refuse to weep and drown in sorrow. Instead, I set goals for today and tomorrow and then try to exceed them. You will certainly be missed, but you taught us all that it's a long walk to freedom. Viva. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Brenda Sanya, who is a representative of the African Students Organization. She's also a doctoral candidate in the College of Education at the University of Illinois.
Good afternoon. So I think I have the hardest task because I have to follow all this wonderful sharing. And, you know, when I was asked to speak, I at first thought I would speak with many other students. So I have great trepidation as I think about the fact that I'm supposed to represent lots of people, but I'll speak about my personal experiences and also think about what I believe that as African students here and as students in general and as citizens we should be part of in thinking about Mandela's legacy. I was 5 years old on February 11th, 1990, and my mother was doing graduate work at Indiana Bloomington, and there were a lot of celebrations because, as many of you know, a lot of South Africans had come to do graduate work or had come in exile to join family there. And I did not know that it would mark me so much, but it has, and I can't talk all about it, but I can only say that that is the case. So this morning, as I was thinking about what to say, and I was listening to Democracy Now!, Ronnie Casseroles was on there speaking about what he learned from Mandela, and one of the things he said is, read everything. And the idea of reading everything as a way to think about learning what you know and what you don't know, and thinking about the global struggle for justice and for racial equality. And Mandela's views were not perfect, and I think that one of the biggest lessons I take from his life is his ability to publicly come back and circle back and change his views on things, because that's what we are as human beings. We're imperfect and we change our views, and we are not perfect. And he was not a perfect leader, but he also lived a life that is remarkable and has shaped and continues to shape many of ours. One of the big frustrating things, which I know many people have expressed, and also many of my friends have been talking about, is these public retractions we keep hearing and the need to sanitize Mandela. I think that for me, three things that are not the only three things that I signal to, but I think three that I find important that we should think about, and that Mandela called freedom from poverty a fundamental human right, and that Mandela was a diehard supporter of labor unions, so let's not forget that. And I'll take it a little bit more controversial. Mandela saw his vision of freedom and from racial inequality beyond South Africa, and he repeatedly spoke about freedom for Palestine and the occupied territories, so let's not forget about that. So for me, Mandela really resonates in my life so deeply with the call where he said, when he was talking about Chris Hani, and he said, we must not permit ourselves to be provoked by those who seek to deny us the very freedom that Chris Hani gave his life for and many others gave their lives for. Let us respond with dignity. And so there are many lessons that can be learned from Mandela, and we need to not sanitize him or mold him into ideas that fit into our ideals and our agendas, because there's so much that he has talked about, and he did not confine himself, so why should we? Thank you.
Okay, let me just say thank you again to all our speakers. Our program, now that our program is complete, what we would like to do is open the floor to your comments. We are sure that Madiba has touched many of your lives, and you would like to share your experience with us. I want to emphasize that this is not a Q&A for our speakers, but an open mic, and we want to hear from you. At the same time, we do have a limited amount of time, as we have to leave this room in about 35 minutes. So we're going to, I guess, try to be very democratic about sharing our time. And we would ask that you try to keep your remarks to less than 3 minutes, so that we can have as many people as possible share their stories with us. So I'm going to get some help here from James Kilgore of the Center, and he has an open mic, and we'd like to hear from you, so please don't be shy. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, okay, sure. Okay.
My name is Eyamba Bokamba. Sometimes more frequently than I would like to, but now it's going to be even much more painful. When I meet people at airports or on the streets or at conferences, they approach me and say, "Excuse me, sir, are you by any chance related to Mandela?" And I tell them, no, I wish I could even carry his shoes because he was my hero. But now it's going to be a painful memory every time that I'm going to be reminded of that. But my contribution here comes from the heart because the death of Mandela has impacted many of us in different ways, and we come from different experiences. My own experience was that of being an undergraduate student at the University of Kansas and cutting my first political teeth as an activist undergraduate student. And ever since that time, we're talking about the 60s, the Mandela's legacy, what transpired in South Africa in terms of struggle for liberation, struggle for independence from apartheid, has never left me, has been a continuous reminder that we are not free until all of us are free. And in this respect, I would say that from time to time, we witness the emergence of, let's say, extraordinary men and women, like Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, and lately Mandela of South Africa, who commit themselves to the mission with which we were endowed by the Creator, and that is to pursue happiness for all the times, irrespective of where we come from, so that when such individuals leave us, leave this world and to join the ancestors, we feel it deeply because they are so committed and they are not afraid to sacrifice their lives. And that's what Mandela said. He was committed to the idea to such an extent that he was willing to sacrifice his life if it need be. So today we, in part, look at the 27 years that Mandela spent in prison with his colleagues. And anyone who had seen where he spent 15 of those years in Robben Island, and my wife and I were privileged to have visited that, you cannot come out without being not only saddened, but also feel the sense that the struggle must go on. So by cherishing his own freedom, and even more so that of other human beings in South Africa, and by demonstrating to the world that reconciliation with one's former oppressor is possible and a better approach than retaliation, and that multiracial democracy can be achieved peacefully under a leadership that is committed to respect to our inalienable rights, that better the inalienable rights that Mandela demonstrated that we have within us the capacity to change, the power to change and transform our societies for the better if and when we commit ourselves to these missions. So we, in a Christian tradition of all sorts, whether Catholic, Protestant, and so on, one would say, we pray that the Creator will grant all of us the indomitable spirit exemplified in the late President Mandela's long walk to freedom, and also that he would instill in us the requisite courageous compassion to speak out and act decisively against each of these, those who make it impossible for justice not to be practiced or to be had. So today we mourn President Mandela's death, but we also join the people of South Africa and people of Africa in general and of the world in a celebration of his achievement and exemplary life during our time. This was indeed an uncommon privilege, and we must not lose sight of it. And may the people of the world and of South Africa continue to drink from the fountain of the Mandela's wisdom and indomitable spirit for the liberation of the human beings. And as we speak today, I'm reminded of a promise that I made in 2007, and some of you were here, and I remember that Maimuna was there, when I was given an award by the Twin City of Urbana-Champaign, what is called the Champaign-Urbana International Humanitarian Award. I indicated then that I would like to commit part of my life and career here to doing one thing, and that is to try to raise funds, working with administrators and so on, to establish a center that then I called the Mandela Bunch, Birth Bunch, okay? Center in which several units, African American Studies, and African American Cultural Studies would have offices and space to conduct not only just research, but also to provide opportunities for exchange of students as well as faculty members to do research on the African diaspora. Now that Mandela is dead, or incidentally, I mentioned then, I said the multi-complex would be built, and I even had a site at the corner of Goodwin and Oregon Street, opposite of Expresso Royale, and that I was prepared to pursue this with the foundation and anybody else who was willing, so we can do this kind of work. And that now that Mandela is left us, the question becomes, what can we do? What is our responsibility? In my sense is that for a university like ours, that was strongly engaged, in part belatedly, but due to protests from faculty and students about divestment, that we should continue to use those funds that were initially put for that divestment and to sponsor scholarship to a new mission, and that mission would be to establish a center in honor of this man and other great men who have preceded us. And I don't think that we can do better than that and to live this memory and practices rather than simply appreciating and living at that. Thank you very much.
I think Paul, thank you. Some others that may want to speak? We'll just
I'm just moved by the idea of the odious debt, that paying twice for the apartheid debt, the deal that was cut. It's not a critique of Mandela, it's a critique of the world that would exact this debt, and that it still goes on. The IMF has a deal that Patrick Bond has talked about of mining coal in South Africa to smelt Australian aluminum. And it is not going to help it's not a development project. It's still the same old rubbish that the IMF has been shoveling for so many years. It's absolutely insidious. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. It's okay. We're losing some of our audience here, so maybe we'll wind up, but a few more people. Sure.
Hi, good evening. I'm Imani Bazell. And as I've been thinking for the past couple days, should I say something, shouldn't I say anything? For those of y'all who know me, you knew I had to say something. And then, hey, Mommy! And then I was trying to decide, should I tell a funny story? Should I tell a serious story? So I will try to keep within my 3 minutes, Merle.
It's okay.
And the story I want to tell, I think you were here at the time. I hope you were, and I hope this brings back some memories. But a quick little funny, back in the 80s, where there was the real height of the anti-apartheid struggle here in the States and here on campus, there was a big move around boycotting Shell. Remember that? Yes. So I had a young child at the time Quab might have been 2, maybe 3. So we're driving quickly down Green Street, I want to say. It was when I worked in this building. So my husband was going to drop me off here. We had to get Quabbin out of daycare. Then he had to get to DCFS. And for those of you who have that distorted Y chromosome that makes you think that E means quarter tank, let me just say, we ran out of gas right in front of a Shell station, rushing on our way to work and daycare. And we're like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? And we're like, okay, maybe we can go buy just enough to get where we need to get to, and then we'll fill up later. Honey, out of the mouths of babes, what does Quab and I say? We boycott Shell. He's in the back seat in his car seat. We boycott Shell. We can't buy any gas here. And I see Vanita's laughing back here. She knows Quab. And that's just one of my little funny anti-apartheid boycott stories. But a quick one about the university and what it means to kind of face people and challenge people who you want and need to have relationships with, who have fallen asleep at the wheel in planning things. So this would have been in the late 80s, I think. Merle, when did you get here?
The late 80s.
Yeah, so I think you might have been here. For at least a year, the program of the Women in Development, the conference was going to be here on campus, and they'd been planning a very long time, and I was the program director at the YWCA, which you know was also in this building, and my executive director was, serving on the planning committee. It was an international conference, going to be a big thing. And so on the evening it was starting, I'm just a magnet for trouble. It just comes and finds me. So somehow I run up against these women who had shown up from Minneapolis, St. Paul, and they were a part of the Women's League for Peace and Freedom, yes, all white women. And we noted in the program that there was a white South African woman who was being presented as a major speaker and contributor to this conference, but in honor of the sanctions against South Africa and in support of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, the world was being asked to only allow people from South Africa to participate in things who were anti-apartheid activists, that somehow you needed some credential, right? Or you were not allowed to participate, be it an academician, an entertainer, athlete, what have you. And so that was well understood, which means that the people who planned this very big, important international conference were obviously asleep at the wheel if they had invited this woman who had no anti-apartheid credentials at all. Then there was also a black woman who was there, but she was way down here somewhere in some plenary somewhere, who did have credentials for being here from the ANC or whomever. And so just a story about having to confront things like that. We rushed around trying to find people. What should we do? What should we do? We have to do an action. And for those of you who don't know, the YWCA's mission is the empowerment of women and the elimination of racism wherever it exists and by any means necessary. So shoot, I was the program director. I took that to heart. So we knew we had to do something. And let me tell you, Vanita, were you around? You were still around then, because I went and gathered up all my babies. When I came there, the student organization was called SLP, right? Student Leadership Panel. Honey, my babies renamed it Women Working for Progress, right? Vanita, you were the president at one point, correct? Yes, that's my baby, Vanita Goins back there, who now works here. So anyway, Bill Martin, I remember, helped us out, and some others. So what we found was, we said, okay, we found out they're going to be running it by Robert's rules, right? So there's some obscure something in Robert's rules that Bill or somebody helped us find that said if a majority of the conferees vote to change the program, you can essentially take over the conference and redo the program. So there are hundreds of people here from across the country and international visitors as well. So I mean, we're organizing fast. I bring them over here, we get posters and we start printing up stuff and markers, and my poor white executive director, who really believed she was an anti-racist white woman, but was of course mortified that we were doing this, but she couldn't stop us and she couldn't say don't do it, because she knew, how can we say we're for women and against racism and this thing is coming up? So her heart was pounding. She was going to have to face these people who were her peers, but she couldn't shut us down. So long story short, we had to work the conferences, right? And so when the conference was, officially opened, one of us was to stand up and, call the question. And we had to make sure a certain amount of people who were registered conferees would vote yes. And it was about, we had to somehow close the conference and then reopen it officially as this other thing, right? Believe it or not, we called the question and we won.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And we also first, let me say, consulted with this white South African just to make sure, baby, did somebody say it was, who do you work with? Are you legitimate? And, no. And we talked to the black woman who was, so we moved the black female South African to the top of the agenda and didn't say this other woman couldn't speak, but the coordinators were going to have to find a place for her. So that's just a small example of thinking globally and acting locally and what it means to be on top of things on the ground where you live. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Melka. I'm a student at the veterinary school here at the U of I. I studied in South Africa for a number of years at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Pietermaritzburg and Pretoria, and I have a lot to say because I think everyone's been maybe feeling a lot of emotions and things like that, but I don't know what to say, and a lot of people have said some really good things as well. But it's short, I promise. I brought a book to read. It's called What a Gentleman. It's a children's story about Nelson Mandela. So is it okay if I come up there? It's super short, yeah. Okay, thanks. All right, that's called What a Gentleman. My grandmother loves Mr. Mandela. We all know that. And my grandmother knows everything. My grandmother says Mr. Mandela is a very wise man. That's why he's the president of our country, she says. My grandmother says Mr. Mandela cares about ordinary people. He goes out of his way to help where he can, she says. My grandmother says Mr. Mandela believes children are special people. That is why children all over South Africa love him so much, she says. And every year, many lucky children are invited to his birthday party. My grandmother says Mr. Mandela is an inspiring person. He specially wore a Springbok jersey when he watched the final of the Rugby World Cup. That's why we won, she says. And do you know which long-distance runner won a gold medal for our country at the Olympic Games in Atlanta, she asks. Mr. Mandela, my brother answers. No, 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 my grandmother says. Mr. Mandela is a statesman, not an athlete. It was Josiah Tongwane who won it, I answer, and burst out laughing because my brother looks like a silly dog with his tail between his legs. And when Mr. Tongwane accepted his medal, he said he did it for Mr. Mandela, my grandmother says proudly. Can you see how he inspires people? My grandmother says Mr. Mandela is kind and gentle. That is how people throughout the world think of him, she says. My grandmother says Mr. Mandela gets up early so he can exercise. That is why he is so fit and healthy, she says. My grandmother says Mr. Mandela is a trendsetter. He wears the most beautiful shirts, she says. My grandmother says Mr. Mandela believes families are precious. He is a great family man himself, she says. My grandmother says Mr. Mandela loves nature. He planted vegetables when he was on Robben Island and sometimes gave the warders tomatoes and onions, she says. My grandmother says Mr. Mandela is handsome and charming. He has such a good sense of humor, she says. That is why wherever he goes, people want to be near him to share in the Madiba magic. Of course, I think to myself, given half a chance, my grandmother will be first in the queue. My grandmother says she heard a rumor that Mr. Mandela has been seen in the company of a very beautiful woman. But still, she says, he can put his shoes under my bed anytime. I wonder why she says that. Bye, till next time. Thank you.
I think you can have one more speaker.
Hi.
Yes, hello.
My name is Sophia Lewis, and I lead the Women in the Jail work group of CUCPJ, Champaign-Urbana Citizens for Peace and Justice. I really wasn't going to say anything, but I feel like I need to. This is the end of the year, and there have been several programs on campus that involve acknowledging the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. And I always wish that I had, every time someone becomes deceased, and I realize, oh wow, it would have been great to have met that person, because then I could get their take on the movements that we're fighting with in this community. And I did get a chance to meet Angela Davis, and I got some insight from her. And I let her know a few things because that's what she wanted to know. She wanted to know, what's happening here locally. I project out a lot, but I want to know about what's going on around here. And one thing that is very disturbing and upsetting that has not gotten mentioned in the process of the noting that we are in the 150th sesquicentennial of the Emancipation Proclamation signing is that no one is acknowledging how children's custody is being treated like chattel. Children are being treated as chattel by the social services industry. No one has provided this community an addressment to the research that said that 44% of the children removed from their homes did not need to be removed. This was a study that was done by the Office of the Inspector General 20 years ago. And we're so used to being a commodity of the system that nobody has even stood up and demanded anything. But we're insistent that this is going to be a trend that is going to end. It's a shame that we act like we can't talk to our young black mothers and young black fathers who are in trouble, so to speak, with the system. And their children are being permanently removed over completely surmountable issues. And it's an injustice and it's wrong. And I'm thinking, well, at first I thought, well, I would like to know what his take would be on the things that are being done and what an injustice that this is with African culture valuing family so much. But right now I really feel that with this campaign being waged close enough to the time of his death, I already feel in the spirit that he would be very much endorse what we are fighting for. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to let James Kilgore have the last word.
Thank you. I wasn't gonna. And it's those movements that produced Nelson Mandela, and they were everywhere in South Africa. They were in workplaces, they were in trains, in buses, and in the prison yards where Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela spent nearly 3 decades of his life. So I think it's important to remember that Nelson Mandela did not walk that long journey alone. He walked with millions of South Africans and millions of other people around the world. And I think for those of us involved in social justice here, we should think about building movements and building organizations, and not waiting for the next Martin Luther King, the next Ella Baker, the next Dolores Huerta, the next Leonard Peltier, the next Chelsea Manning. But we have to take our long journey, manufacture our own heroes and heroines as we move, and not let Anderson Cooper create them for us.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Our tribute to Nelson Mandela has now come to an end. And on behalf of the Center for African Studies, I want to thank all of you for coming to this memorial in remembrance of Madiba. Of course, an event of this magnitude is no easy task to arrange. Foremost, I would like to thank the Center for African Studies staff, Maimouna Barrow, Julia Bello Bravo, Terry Gittler, Tarnjeet Kang, and especially James Kilgore. We are also very grateful to the African Students Organization for their assistance. And I'm talking about from advertising the event to handing out our programs today. In particular, we would like to thank the University YMCA for their help in pulling this together. We are grateful for all their work in promoting social justice in our community, and we encourage you to support them. I will now ask Becky to lead the South African traditional closing chant used to end all major events.
This is the best. I'll just pick one song, one line, right? It says, Hamba Wintro, Hamba Da, okay? Nkonjo, Hamba Da, okay? Konjo, Nkonjo Wesiwe. That's that. Because this is where this name came from. Equal. So we raise our feet, and the song goes, it's a call and response kind of a song, right? I started to say, then the response will be, right? I will try and give you Long live Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, long live. the spirit of Governor long live. Long live. Long live the spirit of Chris Honey. Long live. Long